Yes, go ahead.
Hello, thank you for joining us for the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association webinar, Regional Indian Arts and Crafts Board Museums and Building Art Directories. We're going to be looking at these hidden treasures, amazing collections and resources at the Indian Arts and Crafts Board Museums. Today's webinar is made possible with a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, NEA, and this is a part of a new initiative here at IENTA to engage artists and Native nations to help build Native arts programs in their communities and promote artists and art events through our website, nativeamerica.travel. My name is Melanie Laborwit, and I am IENTA's Native Arts and Culture Coordinator. I have worked for many years with museums and developing public sector programs, celebrating regional, traditional, heritage and culture programs, and I will be working to grow partnerships with Native nations, artists, and regional museums, galleries, and cultural centers to raise visibility and access for cultural tribal resources. It is an exciting time to join IENTA this past year as we all work to empower Native arts and the role that they play in cultural tourism as well as in heritage preservation. In today's webinar, attendees will learn more about the Indian Arts and Crafts Board and learn more about their regional museums and some of the programs which can be replicated elsewhere, including art directories, events listing, promoting local art and history, and also learn about resources available to other tribal cultural centers and museums. How can museums use their expertise, space, and collections and programs that educate and engage the public and the Native communities that they serve? Professionals from the U.S. Department of the Interior, Indian Arts and Crafts Board will share how tribal arts collections can be used to promote local artists, enrich their education through sharing skills and resources, and also how Native Arts Directories can boost economic development in tribal communities anywhere. For those of you who are not familiar with IENTA, thank you for joining us again. For nearly 2 decades, IENTA has served as the national voice for American Indian nations and Native Hawaiians engaged in cultural tourism. In addition to serving as the voice for Indian country tourism, IENTA provides technical assistance and training to tribal nations and Native-owned enterprises engaged in cultural tourism, hospitality, and recreation. IENTA's mission is to define, introduce, grow, and sustain American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian tourism that honors traditions and values. You might want to save the date. It's early yet, but IENTA's 25th annual American Indian Tourism Conference will be held this fall, October 2 to 5, in 2023 at the Choctaw Casino and Resort in Durant, Oklahoma. And this year's theme, We Are Still Here, is going to be very exciting. So we hope that you can join us. Sponsorship opportunities are available, and you can visit our website at IENTA, aianta.org to learn more about other education program offerings. At this time, I am pleased to introduce you to our presenters. We have 3 people joining us from Interior. We are going to have a presentation from Ken Van Way. He's the program specialist for the Indian Arts and Crafts Board. With 25 years of experience working to promote and protect authentic American Indian and Alaska Native art and craft work for the Indian Arts and Crafts Board at the U.S. Department of Interior. He received his BA in English and MA in Interdisciplinary Studies with a focus in folklore from George Mason University. Connor McMahon is joining us as Chief Curator with the U.S. Department of Interior and the Indian Arts and Crafts Board. He works at the Sioux Museum. He's currently the Senior Curator at IACB, and in this role, he works to promote and exhibit the artwork of contemporary American Indian and Alaska Native artists, and to preserve and exhibit the rich collections of Native American arts and crafts held by IACB. He supervises the operations of 3 museums operated by the Indian Arts and Crafts Board: the Sioux Museum in Rapid City, South Dakota, the Southern Plains Museum in Anadarko, Oklahoma, and the Museum of the Plains Indian in Browning, Montana. He's held previous positions as curator at the International Museum of the Horse in Lexington, Kentucky, and as Associate Conservator at the Museum of New Mexico Systems in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And Bambi Allen is also joining us. She is the curator at the Southern Plains Museum and Craft Center in Anadarko, Oklahoma. Bambi is Kiowa and Comanche, and she oversees the museum's changing exhibitions programs, as well as educational programming and activities. With a deep-rooted background in American Indian arts and culture, and as a native Oklahomans, excuse me, Allen has served as museum curator since 2012. She has fostered community there, community support for the museum, and implemented a diverse collection of educational programs focused on arts and cultural enrichment. By building partnerships with local governments and tribal entities to bring awareness to the museum, the public support for emerging artists has grown remarkably. Prior to her current position at the Southern Plains Indian Museum, she was cultural specialist at Comanche National Museum in Lawton, Oklahoma. All right, I'm excited to hear about everything that you have going on in all these different places. Ken will be sharing your presentation now, and I understand you'll be moving on to the different next images. Thank you so much for being here, and thank all of you for joining us. We have several questions that we'll assess along the way. The first one, before we get started, have any of you visited any of the Indian Arts and Crafts Board museums? Go ahead and select yes or no there. It's always interesting watching the data come in, but you guys look pretty good. It looks like we have 56% say yes, and 44% have not visited IACB museums. So in the coming year, can I go ahead and share results real quick? And we have the 56% and say yes, and 44% say no. So we're going to go on to the next slide. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ken Van Way, and I'm a program specialist with the Indian Arts and Crafts Board. The Indian Arts and Crafts Board is an agency in the U.S. Department of the Interior that was created in 1935 to promote the economic development of American Indians and Alaska Natives through the expansion of the Indian arts and crafts market. As our slide says, a top priority of the IACB is the implementation and enforcement of the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. And if you've seen me before, that's probably the context you've seen me in. So it's a truth in marketing law, says that if you're going to sell something as American Indian or Alaska Native made, or the product of a particular tribe, that needs to be true. We welcome the opportunity to talk to you about the board's other programs and see me in a different context. Next. Oh, I spoiled this slide, sorry. But yeah, so the act has a specific definition of who an Indian is and who an Indian isn't for purposes of marketing an Indian art or craft product. We're always glad to talk to you, answer your calls, answer your questions. There's contact information for us here. If you have any questions about the Arts and Crafts Act, go ahead and get in touch with us, because we're here to talk about the board's museums and promotional programs for artists. So I would like to pass the baton on to Connor.
Thank you, Ken. I think we're ready for our next slide. So again, I'm Connor McMahon. I'm now the senior curator for the Indian Arts and Crafts Board, just celebrated my 10th anniversary here. And I am based at the Sioux Indian Museum in Rapid City, South Dakota. The board operates 3 museums throughout Indian country. And all 3 of these museums were actually originally created by the Bureau of Indian Affairs in the 1930s and 40s, and then transferred to the Indian Arts and Crafts Board in the late 50s or early 60s, depending on the museum. When they were founded by the BIA, the goal was to collect historic artifacts and to tell the story of Plains peoples in the 19th century, essentially, early 20th century. And an important change happened when the Indian Arts and Crafts Board took over the museums, and that was our focus since the founding of the board in the 1930s has been on contemporary artists. So the board shifted focus and did things like create new exhibition programs that we'll talk more about later, with a focus on contemporary artists. And each of our museums now continues to exhibit both historic collections that were acquired mostly during the BIA era, as well as to present rotating exhibits of contemporary artists, and to also exhibit some of the amazing collections from Native American artists that were acquired by the board from the 1950s until about 2000. So the Sioux Indian Museum here in Rapid City, we are actually housed inside a larger museum facility that's called the Journey Museum and Learning Center. We moved into that facility in 1996, and there are several other partners here in the facility as well, too. The core of the collection here at the Sioux Indian Museum was acquired by a man named John Anderson, who operated a trading post on the Rosebud Reservation from the late 1800s until about 1935. And he acquired an incredible collection that he then sold to the federal government in the 1930s after founding the Sioux Indian Museum as a private museum, and then the BIA assumed operations of the museum. Next slide, please. Our second museum that I'm sure Bambi will talk a little bit more about is the Southern Plains Indian Museum in Anadarko, Oklahoma. That museum was founded originally as a cooperative effort between the state of Oklahoma and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and then transferred over to the IACB again in the 1950s. This museum has a really incredible collection particularly of paintings is the strength of that museum. And there's incredible collections from the Kiowa Five, Stephen Mopope here on the screen, as well as Alan Hauser is very well represented, T.C. Cannon, some of the most famous artists from that area that are held at the Southern Plains Indian Museum. And the SPIM, as we call it, you know, we love our acronyms in the federal government, has really probably our most robust programming schedule, educational programs and other activities that Bambi will talk about more later in the presentation. Next slide. And our final museum is the Museum of the Plains Indian in Browning, Montana on the Blackfeet Reservation. This museum really has an extraordinary collection representing various tribes from the Northern Plains. The largest collection would be Blackfeet materials. Much of that was acquired by John Ewers, who was the first curator of this museum, very well-known curator and student of Plains Indian history. Studied under Clark Whistler at Columbia University, and John Ewers would go on to the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History as their curator of ethnology, where he would spend several decades and end his career. There are also really large collections of Lakota materials at this museum, Crow, Northern Cheyenne, all well represented there. Victor Pepion is probably our most famous Blackfeet artist who's represented in that collection, and his only series of murals that he ever created adorn the lobby of this museum. It's an incredible fresco technique. If you haven't been there, I really encourage all of you to visit it. Right on the gateway to Glacier, and we're always happy to have visitors at that museum. All right, next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our exhibition program at all three of the museums. We refer to this as our SEPCO. It's a acronym as well, too, the Special Exhibition Program for Contemporary Artists. And this program is now 54 years old. As I said, when the board took over the museums in the 1960s, they retooled them and created this new exhibition program. At the time, there were limited opportunities for Native American artists to exhibit in museums, so the board was really at the forefront of offering those opportunities. So I'm excited. Next year will be our 55th anniversary of this exhibition program. And just to kind of put that in context, at the Sioux Indian Museum alone, we've done 250 exhibits in those 55 years. So approximately the same at each of the 3 museums, so we're well over 700 exhibits under this program. And really the focus of this is on emerging artists who are early in their career, not necessarily just young artists. We have a lot of artists who might have finished one career and moved into arts as a second. And so we really see our role in these exhibits as mentors to kind of help artists understand the process of what's involved in developing a museum or gallery exhibit, and offering them resources and advice and expertise as we move through that program. The exhibits are open. It's a nationwide exhibit program. So even though our 3 museums are all in the Great Plains, we really do actively try to locate artists from around the country. The exhibit that's here at the Sioux Indian Museum right now is featuring Heather Johnson, originally from Alaska. So we have some extraordinary Alaskan art. Really, the only requirement for participating in our exhibits is to be an enrolled member of a federally recognized tribe or an Alaska Native. And as I said earlier, we tend to focus on artists who are kind of early in their career. Each of our museums has a dedicated gallery space for these exhibits, so we exhibit them separately from the rest of our collections. And next slide. And these exhibits are a little bit different from your usual museum exhibit in that artists have the opportunity to sell their artwork during the exhibit. So they're structured more like an exhibit at a commercial art gallery. And we partner with gift shops that are located in our museums. The board doesn't directly operate any gift shops. We're actually by law prohibited from being directly involved in the Native American art market. So even though we're developing these sales exhibits, we either work with the artists so that they can make sales directly with interested buyers, or we can work with the gift shops that we partner with at our various museums on the sales. And so what do artists get out of this program? We develop a new special brochure for each of our exhibits. That's available on our website. We provide copies to the artists for their portfolio. They're free to distribute that as they would like. We also develop online versions of many of our exhibits. That was something relatively new for us. We were kind of forced into it with the COVID pandemic, but it was really a wonderful opportunity to begin to reach a larger audience with our online exhibits. And we also discovered the beauty of an online exhibit is that it essentially lasts forever, right? Our exhibits at the museums typically run about 3 months in length. So they're relatively short exhibits, and they happen all year long. So traffic can vary throughout the year, but the online exhibits, which are available through our website, are a great opportunity for the artists to reach a really larger audience and have their work kind of commemorated forever. We do opening receptions for most of our exhibits. We love for the artists to be there if possible, and they have the chance to meet with our visitors, and that also helps with sales, of course, when the artists can be there at the exhibit opening. Next slide, please. We've also, in recent years, started developing other exhibits in partnership with the communities where the museums are located. And these are some of our most exciting exhibits, right? Because we can get input from the community about what it is they want to see at the museum and work with them to develop the exhibit. And I'll present 2 examples from our museums. And the first was at the Museum of the Plains Indian in Browning, Montana. We had for years been hearing from the local community that they wanted to see more of the collection that was in storage. And we were fortunate to be working with some guest curators and interns at the time who brought to our attention this incredible collection of paintings of Blackfeet teepees and lodges that was done in the 1930s by 3 Blackfeet artists, Victor and Howard Pepion, and Cecile Lastar, also known as Cecile Blackboy. And these individuals created these watercolor paintings from actual teepees that they were seeing in their community. They also, as part of the WPA Writers Program, they gathered the traditional Blackfeet stories that were associated with these teepees. And so we digitized all of that material and invited community members to help us develop the text, provide us with historic photos that were used in the exhibit. We put this exhibit up in the wintertime too, so it was really focused on the local community there. And it was so popular, even though it was up for 7 months, when we took it down, the community said, well, when can we see it again? We took it down for the summer to move on to our contemporary artist program, and then it went right back up the next winter. And I'll also put a plug in. All of these materials actually for this particular exhibit are available as a traveling exhibit. If any of your tribal museums or cultural centers, community centers are interested in borrowing the materials for this exhibit, please send me an email and we'd love to send it your way. We also have one other traveling exhibit that I'll show later that's available to borrow. There's no cost for any of this, so if you're interested, please let us know. Next slide, please. Another exhibit that we did here at the Sioux Indian Museum, which I thought was a really exciting partnership and way to utilize our museum collections. And I think this is a great idea. I didn't come up with it. I wish I could say I did. But I think it's something that many tribal museums could take away and maybe apply for their own situations. And that was the Sioux Indian Museum partnered with another organization called Native Cairns, the Center for American Indian Research and Native Studies. And Dr. Craig Howe leads that organization. And he wanted to present an exhibit about the Lakota Emergence story. And how could we do that? And what we ultimately ended up doing was a combination of using historic objects from our museum collection and pairing that with new pieces that were created, contemporary pieces created by Lakota artists to tell this story of Lakota creation. And the most exciting aspect of it for me was that we actually selected, Craig Howe, the lead curator here, selected the items from the museum collection to be used to tell the story. And then we pulled all those items out of storage and set them up in a meeting room here at the museum. And we had an open house for the artists to come see all these objects. And then many of the artists chose to create new work based on these historic items that they had seen. And so here you can see an example of a stained glass piece that Angela Babby did, depicting a parfleche envelope and reflecting on the parfleche envelopes that were from the museum collection, and those objects were shown side by side. So a wonderful way to tie history and contemporary art together. Next slide, please. And then we also wanted throughout the presentation to talk about the resources that our museums can provide for tribal organizations, tribal members, artists, things of that nature. Our museums are always here to assist with advice or sometimes even hands-on help with care of museum collections and artifacts. One example, and the photo in the top right of the screen shows this, is the Oglala Sioux tribe was approached by a museum in Canada that wanted to repatriate a manuscript and drawing done by Luther Standing Bear to the tribe. At the time, the tribe didn't really have the resources to receive the actual object and deal with some of the conservation issues. So we offered to accept the shipment here at the museum. And then Arthur Amiot, who was working with the tribe on this project, and Tawadushanu, the tribal archivist, came to the museum to unpack the manuscript, and I worked with her really closely on how could we humidify and unroll the manuscript and preserve it and digitize it and those sorts of things. We also regularly partner with tribal organizations for educational programs, and Bambi's going to talk about that a lot. And then we're always happy to assist tribal members or organizations with questions that they might have about how they can access resources from DOI as a whole or other federal agencies. We're always there as a resource, so don't hesitate to contact us. All right, next slide, please. And we also wanted to talk about our partnerships with other federal agencies. Most of these are going to be within DOI, but we also work with some other federal agencies as well too, especially our central office in Washington, D.C. We work very closely with the National Park Service in a couple of different aspects. Perhaps our major partnership is with Glacier National Park and their Native America Speaks program. I understand that you guys had a webinar on that recently. So we've been working with Native America Speaks for probably about 6 or 7 years now. And that's been a really wonderful collaboration because that program, it's the oldest Native American educational program within the National Park Service, right? And I'm really excited to say that the Museum of the Plains Indian is the first venue to host those programs outside of a national park. And so we were really delighted when the Park Service approached us and offered us that opportunity. Because basically we're able to tap into Park Service resources and offer programming primarily for the community there in Browning. So the programs that we're developing that happen at the museum, especially during the winter months, we also expanded it beyond just the summer, and it runs nearly year round now. And the programs that we're doing in the winter are more focused on what would the local Blackfeet community like to see. In the summer, we do programs more oriented towards the general public. Bambi has developed some wonderful partnerships with Ouachita Battlefield National Historic Site. We've worked with Mount Rushmore and Badlands National Park here in South Dakota. We work really closely with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as well too on law enforcement related to the Indian Arts and Crafts Act, but we also work with them on exhibit development and outreach. The slide in the top right is another traveling exhibit that we've developed, which really talks about the art forms, traditional art forms of the Great Plains, beadwork, quill work, hide painting, things like that. We've sent that to Fish and Wildlife Service refuges and other sites, as well as other locations, and that's available for tribal museums if they'd like to borrow that exhibit as well too. We work obviously very closely with BIA. They still own many of our facilities, and we work with them on programs and museum collection issues. We work closely with BIE. Bambi has a wonderful partnership with Riverside Indian School, and then we work also with the Department of Commerce, U.S. and Patent Trademark Office, and Ken and our central office work very closely with them as well too. Next slide, please. All right, and this is my last slide. I'm going to transition to Bambi, but we're going to talk a little bit about cultural programming in our museums. And I think Bambi will focus on the Southern Plains Indian Museum, but I wanted to talk about a really wonderful program we have at the Museum of the Plains Indian, which is our Demonstrating Artists program. And that's been going on for about 9 years now, and has been a wonderful success. And I think this is something that is an easy program for tribal organizations to adopt. And essentially, we just provide space in our museum for local artists and a basic setup of a table and some chairs. And we invite artists to come spend time at the museum and work on their art while they're there and visit with visitors. And again, the artists are able to sell all their work to visitors. And this really provides an important outlet for the artists on the Blackfeet Reservation. It's the quickest and easiest way for them to connect with a large market for their artwork in the summer. And our visitors, as you can imagine, love it as well too. The chance to meet directly with the artist is really important for them. It's an experience that they can take home with them. And they're much more likely to buy a piece, right? If they can talk with the artist and the artist has a chance to sell it. So if you have any questions about that program, we'd also be happy to answer those, but we'd really encourage everyone to give that a try if you haven't. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bambi, and she'll talk about some of the wonderful programs that she's developed in Oklahoma. Thanks.
Thank you, Connor. The cultural programming at the Southern Plains Indian Museum has been centered around the local tribal culture of mainly the Kiowa, Comanche, Caddo, Delaware, Wichita, Apache, and the Fort Sill Apache tribes. This has created a lot of community interest and has been vital for growing attendance as well as helping preserve the culture. Next slide, please. Last March, after being closed for the pandemic, the museum hosted a welcome back celebration for the community. This was very helpful since many at the time of the other institutions in town were still closed to the public. Many tribal elders and members of the community were very grateful for the event since it was held outdoors and it created a more comfortable atmosphere for everyone. In attendance were community leaders such as the executive director of the Anadarko Chamber of Commerce and representatives from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, tribal chairmen, tribal princesses, and several prominent artists from the area. Tribal dancing and artist demonstrations were held throughout the event. Next slide. Another great way to create community interest is hosting interactive workshops. One example began with the partnership with the National Park Service. This was a moccasin making class. The first class was held prior to the beginning of the pandemic, and the remainder of the sessions were adapted and held via Zoom. This proved to be a little bit challenging for the teachers and students, so only a small percentage of the class was able to actually finish their moccasins and have a product afterwards. So learning from this, we decided to build on it, and in December, the museum was able to host an in-person workshop taught by a community volunteer and myself. This 3-day workshop had an overwhelming community response. We've had numerous calls and emails asking when the next time we'll host another one. We actually had to turn away so many people. We had about 60 interested in participating and was only able to accommodate 15. So this is definitely something we will build on in the future. Next slide. Seasonal activities has also been very popular in our museum. By creating partnerships with local schools, we have been able to have a steady flow of tourists coming in throughout the school year. And during the summer, we have partnered with local tribes that already host summer youth camps. You can see here in the first picture, a group viewing the horse sculpture Unstoppable, which was made by Choctaw artist Gene Ironman Smith. On a side note, this horse has created a lot of interest in the area and actually led to a sale for this artist. Unstoppable now is a part of the Western Heritage Museum's collection in Oklahoma City. In the second picture, a group you can see is sitting down to hear about a traveling exhibit focused on Alaskan ivory, which is now displayed at our museum in Browning. Next slide. So our seasonal activities, you can see here the Delaware tribe had hosted a summer youth camp focused on older students. So on a day that they had available, we brought them to the museum and hosted a teepee raising demonstration. The participants were able to learn the steps for raising a teepee and even were able to help with close supervision. Partnering with these already established groups, we were able to host these events with limited staffing and resources. Partnerships like these are a major plus for small museums. Next slide. Annual events. Another approach we have taken is building on long-standing relationships with groups that host tourism-focused annual events. The American Indian Exposition is our best example of this. They host a week-long fair that has been going on since the 1920s. Throughout the week, the museum has a princess fashion show, an archery competition, and an art show. Previously, the museum had only extended its hours to accommodate the large crowds of guests in the area, but by expanding on that relationship, it has proven valuable and provided a stable partner for both institutions. Next slide. The holidays are also a great way to provide an outlet for community activities. In October, we host a spooky storytelling that always boasts a large attendance. This is a family-friendly event and is always free and open to the public. We have designated guest storytellers that are always invited. They begin the event, and about halfway through the night, we open the mic to the public that anyone who would like to tell a story has that opportunity. And we have all ages of people to help tell stories, from little bitty kids to elders. Some years you can see in the second photo, we actually have an appearance by Bigfoot himself. Next slide. Another great month for annual events is December. We always host a holiday event all month long We have a craft table set up so that children can make arts and crafts. And if they choose, they can actually package it and give it as a gift. During the pandemic, of course, we weren't able to have people in the museum, but we were able to adapt this program and provide a drive-through pickup for a craft bag. We also included a note in the bag for them to email a photo of the finished craft. This was very successful, and the community was thankful that we provided a safe and free activity for so many kids that had been stuck at home for so long. This concludes my portion, and I'll turn it back over to Ken, who will be talking more about the IACB resources and outreach programs.
There we go. Yeah, so the Indian Arts and Crafts Board uses our museums to do a variety of other outreach activities. The photo here at the top is me several years ago at the Museum of the Plains Indian doing one of my ubiquitous Indian Arts and Crafts Act presentations as part of a larger artist seminar where we brought in business experts on particular topics and people from other federal agencies to provide information to the artists in attendance. The Indian Arts and Crafts Board museums serve as a hub for these sorts of activities, but we also participate in events at other tribal cultural facilities and at major Indian markets where we frequently have booths. Next slide. We wanted to make sure that you were aware that the Indian Arts and Crafts Board has a variety of consumer education publications that you can have at your museums or that might have information that are useful to you. We have some art and craft form specific brochures that we've put together on buying authentic Navajo weavings, on turquoise as a material. And then for our Alaska focus, we've got an Alaska Native Ivory and a sea otter brochure. So those are sort of a way that we can help you connect with tourists and others about the products that are culturally important. Next slide. We also work with states that have their own arts and crafts laws to jointly promote the Indian Arts and Crafts Act and those state laws. Also tourist focused, but they do contain information that's useful to artists and to tribal officials interested in ensuring fair marketing practices within their region. So these are some examples here are with Montana, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Alaska. Next slide. We also promote authentic Indian art through advertisements that we take out in art market specific publications and through tourist publications. And we also distribute a lot of our brochures through visitor centers, airport kiosks, museums, and cultural centers. Next slide. And these are also a way we can promote contemporary artists by using images of their work. So we have a source directory that's online at the Indian Arts and Crafts Board website to promote American Indian and Alaska Native owned and operated arts and crafts businesses. We promote the website through our own website, through consumer publications, our Facebook page, and through online and print advertisements. Next slide. So just to get a sense of this, are you a participant in the Indian Arts and Crafts Board source directory?
So we have some results here. 68% say no, have not listed. So there's a lot of opportunity, and we have 32% said no, but I'm interested. So hopefully we'll see some growth there, and it's a really great opportunity to get the word out about your work and get a wider audiences. So thank you.
All right.
For that, we'll go on to the next slide.
So for those 13 people that are no, but don't indicate that they're interested, this slide is for you. There are benefits to having a source directory entry. The obvious one, it puts your information out there so that consumers can find you if they're looking for the work. It also promotes consumer confidence in your business, because if they're looking you up and finding you in various online listings, it shows that you, in our case, you have provided some documentation to an outside party to show that you are who you are. One odd little, well, not necessarily odd, but the Indian Arts and Crafts Board, as the maintainer of the directory, when things come by our office or we have a question or somebody cold calls us looking for a particular kind of art, our first stop is our source directory. So there is an opportunity right there if you're there, because you are low-hanging fruit. Search engine optimization. I'm certainly not an expert on the Google algorithm or anything like that, but the more places that you are online that are connecting to your information and maybe your particular website or your email address, it raises your standing in the search engines when people go to find that kind of work or looking for you in particular, especially if you share a name with somebody who's not you. It helps boost you up there when they're looking. There is another Ken Van Way, for instance, who's apparently a car driver, like some sort of professional racer. I didn't know that until someone pointed it out. You want to differentiate yourself from your other name people. And then in keeping with that search engine optimization, don't limit yourself to one directory. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. A lot of tribes have tribal specific art pages. Some tribal employment rights offices maintain lists of businesses that are owned by their tribal members. And a lot of art markets, especially in the course of the COVID pandemic, started art market directories in lieu of having their in-person markets. And while some of those are returning to in-person markets, they're maintaining those directories, and those are a variety of places that people can find you, and it is always good to be findable. Next slide. For those of you who are interested in an Indian Arts and Crafts Board source directory listing, the key requirement is that you have to be an enrolled member of a federally recognized Indian tribe, Alaska Native village, or a shareholder in an Alaska Native corporation, as defined under the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. So these are sort of the general listing requirements. I've got an example here of our form. If you don't have a shop location, you can still be in it, because we welcome mail order and internet sales. The second requirement would be that the majority of products you offer for sale have to be art and craft products handmade by members of federally recognized tribes. So, sorry, I've derailed there. Anyway, I have the link there for information. We're going to have that at the back of this. And if you go to our website, you can find that. Again, I'm not going to be able to give you a comprehensive discussion of this, but want you to be aware of this, and you can contact us for more information. Next slide. The Indian Arts and Crafts Board also maintains an Indian market and event list. which as an artist you can look at to look for potential markets that are juried Indian art and craft markets that require that vendors comply with the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. Also, if you're a tribe or other organization that are running an Indian art market or Indian marketing event and wants to be on our list, you can contact the Indian Arts and Crafts Board as long as you meet these requirements. Next slide.
So we have one more question here. Have you ever listed any of your programs or on the Indian Arts and Crafts Board events page that's on their website? Whether it's a powwow or a craft show or a holiday event. So we have 80, it's going down a little bit. I think we're done now. We have 88% that have never listed any of their events on the IACB page, and 12% that have. And so now I hope that 88% knows that that's a wonderful opportunity to get the word out, and again, broadening your audiences for people who are looking for those sorts of events. So did you want to say something about this slide? We've tried to include as many links as we have for the Indian Arts and Crafts Board here. We have also been sharing in our chat so that you'll have all of that information for everybody who's been attending along the way. So you'll be able to find more of that information and be able to find contact information as well for all of our presenters. Did we have any other slides after this? Or are we about ready?
I believe that's it.
We have one more, of course.
That is it.
So I just wanted to I mentioned at the very beginning about nativeamerica.travel, and some of you may or may not know that we have, in addition to the IANTA webpage, nativeamerica.travel is a destination website where you can list everything from not only hotels and lodging and attractions and tours, but also galleries and museums and special events that are going on in your communities. And it's free for anyone in the tribal community to post on nativeamerica.travel. It is divided up by different regions, and it's a wonderful way for tour operators, both in the United States as well as from abroad, to plan their itineraries by looking at our website. So you're more than welcome to take a look there, and where it says sign up, or you can go ahead and fill those pages out, or we can help you fill that out. So we asked who has shared their destination or business at nativeamerica.travel, and we have 29% that said yes, and 43% said no, and another 29% that said yes, but I'd like to learn more. So we look forward to hearing from you. For those who want to learn more, feel free to put your contact information in our chat so that we can contact you directly, and we'd be delighted to help you get started with that information. We have here everybody's email. So everybody said call me or email us. We have lots of information to share with you, and we want to broaden all the resources and make them as available as widely as possible. My contact information is down on the bottom, and you can contact our website directly at aianta.org or nativeamerica.travel to find out more about getting your information on that page as well. Are there any questions? We have a little bit of time to answer some questions that anybody may have. If you want to put them in chat. Thank you very much. We're hearing the Ute Indian Museum is interested in hearing more. Thank you very much for putting your name down there. We'll definitely be in touch.
I'll also just jump in and say on our exhibition programs, one thing I didn't mention, the slide talked about how we try to recruit people as we have staff members at art markets, things like that. But we're also more than happy to just receive emails from artists. You can email me or Bambi if you're interested in participating in the exhibit program. So if you or any friends or family members, don't hesitate to just send us an email and let us know that you're interested in an exhibit, and we'll work on fitting you into the schedule.
Thank you very much for mentioning that. It actually was a question that I was going to ask you about. How does one find out about getting into an exhibit? And if there's a place to send slides and information. Also, I wanted to make mention that if anyone wants to learn more about collaborations with the National Park Service, that was the subject that we did, and shared information on the Native America Speaks program that you mentioned earlier, Connor. And if you go to the IANTA website, you can go to our education page and click on the links for webinars and watch any of the webinars and town halls that we have recorded in the past. And so that was just several months ago. And we invite you to take a look at that as well and learn a little bit more about some new initiatives that the National Park Service is looking into around the country to work with tribal communities that are nearby and develop local interpreters and Native presenters who can come into their parks and who are working with them closely. And I also wanted to make mention about the publications. Are those free on request?
Yes.
Yes.
I believe I remembered that I got some of them when I started working here directly. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that different tribal communities or tribal museums can request those for redistribution in their community. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yep.
And we also have PDFs of all of those up on our website that people can access.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Are there any other questions? Someone is asking about the new link for nativeamerica.travel.com. It works if you have just the www in front of it, and it should open up. And then you'll be all set. Are there any other questions? Again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining today's arts webinar, Business of Arts. And this webinar has been recorded and will be emailed to all registrants as soon as it is available. It will also be archived on our website, so that if you have any friends or colleagues who wish to watch and learn more about the Indian Arts and Crafts Board and some of the resources that are available to everyone in tribal communities, to please go there. Please follow us at ianta.org. You can look on a webinar page for future webinars that are hosted by IANTA. If you are not a member of the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association and would like to be, please contact Gail Chihak, Tribal Relations and Outreach Manager, and you can do so by visiting our website at ianta.org. Memberships start at only $50 if you're a senior. And artists and tribal museums attending may want to make their membership current. We do have a Shop Native initiative that we also have done in the past, mostly for holidays, but we've extended it. We would like to encourage people to shop Native year-round, and tribal museums can list for free, and artists who are members may join there and share their resources on our Shop Native page. It's a great way to reach new customers and broaden your audiences, and it's also a great place to shop. And we appreciate you being here today, and thank you so much. Have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.